Good morning. I would like to call the Human Resources Appointment and Equity Committee meeting Tuesday, May 5th. I'd like to call it to order. Roll call, please.
Calling the roll, Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent. Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Brown.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And although we do not need to excuse committee members, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mike Gallagher. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, no one has signed in.
All right. Committee members, was everyone here for the March 17th meeting? Can we have a motion to approve the minute? All right. All in favor of approval of the minutes from the March 17th, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. We have one item, matters referred to the committee today, and under miscellaneous business, we have the pay equity study report presentation. So we will start with the first item, please.
Resolution 2015-0070, a resolution authorizing an agreement with City of Euclid for participation in the Cuyahoga County Benefits Regionalization Program for the period 4/1/2015 through 12/31/2017, authorizing the county executive to execute the agreement and all other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lisa Durkin from the Department of Human Resources. Feels like it's been a while since I've seen you all. Nice to see you again. The City of Euclid joins us in our healthcare regionalization program with 327 employees. Their effective date being April 1st. As you know, it does go back in time. They have selected a medical mutual 90% plan and a medical mutual healthcare savings account plan, along with a Metro Health Select plan. This was a savings to the city of a little bit over $600,000 for this year, based on their renewal that was offered by their previous holder. Along with this information this morning, because Chairman Conwell had requested that I give a brief benefits presentation the next time we were together, I did attach some items that would be helpful in understanding how the benefits, mostly the benefits fiscal movement works. Attached to our regional listing of regional agreements is the regional health care, showing how the payments come in from the municipalities' employers and employees going into the subfund, being certified into the contracts, and then being paid out via cash in the treasurer's accounts from the contracts. The next handout that I offered was the manner in which we finance the county's healthcare, employee healthcare, and that is via employer and employee payroll deductions going into the hospitalization self-insurance fund, as appropriate being transferred or adjusted over to the fully insured fund, and then being certified into contracts. And I have, for your information, attached our, what we kind of can consider our monthly tally and projections of our various contracts. I certainly am available to answer questions on this and give any other information that you would like. I know that we have a large presentation that we're waiting for on the next item, so I didn't want to take up any time you don't want me to, but I did want to offer that to you since you had requested that at our last meeting.
Are there any questions from the committee? First, I'd like to say, though, if you'd like to schedule for our next May date, 2 weeks from now, then we can go over this, why it's fresh in everyone's mind. But if there's any questions from the committee members in regards to her charting right now, that would. Councilwoman Brown.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'm just curious, what is the CE county employees, what is the CE certified representative?
To the chair, to the councilwoman, the CE is symbolic of a contract. Yes.
What does it stand for? Is it just, does the C and the E represent?
I think it's, CE is on the beginning of every contract number. So it's the, it's the numeric placeholder value that they have on all the contract numbers.
Thank you.
Councilman Miller?
To the best of your knowledge so far in 2015, how are the level of claims that we're paying out comparing to what we've expected? Are your projections for the future going in the positive direction or the other direction?
To the chair, to the councilman. Currently, and I actually did bring some notes with me to share with you on how we're doing. Currently, our Medical Mutual of Ohio is running a bit over for our county population. We're about 1.7 million over where we projected to be at this time this year. Now, that could level off. It could be a combination of factors because, as you know, we always have carryover of claims to cover from the previous year. It could be because of that, and we could experience a huge slowdown from January and February bills. As we've talked about before, generally when we're paying the claims, we are paying bills that, you know, the claims actually happened probably around 3 months ago, and we're just now getting those and paying those. That's how the cycle goes. So we could experience a slowdown from the January and February, and that is what I expect. So I expect that will catch up. So Medical Mutual of Ohio is running about 1.7 over on their projection right now. On Metro Health, the county is I'm showing about $700,000 over the projected amount. And again, I do expect that this is probably because of year-end carryover and that we will slow down because the first 3 months of the year, of any new year, are generally slower, and so the projection basically levels out. I am showing that I had a slight increase in our prescription drug CVS Caremark, but again, the same thing. It's really very early in the year to be concretely basing any projections on what we've seen in the first part of the year, especially because we do pay on a carryover basis. So mid-year will certainly be a much better judge of how we're doing, but this is how we're doing right now, according to the numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Germana?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just remind me, I know we have coverage. Is it specific or is it aggregate?
To the chair, to the councilman, you're speaking of the stop loss coverage, and it is specific. It is individually specific. And the reason for that, as we've discussed before, is because we are such a large population with such a dynamic incubator of, through the years, we've been able to document expressly what our losses have been over a pretty undynamic population. It does not change quickly here. So for us to procure stop loss insurance on an aggregate basis, we would have to have a differential of that projection for the year of what we might miss. And we project so well that we don't often miss. Usually our projections are within 1% of actuals. So buying stop loss on an individual basis for that reason is more efficient, but also because we are at a level of self-insurance that we're at, we're at about a $90 million spend full and self-insure per year. We do need it on a specific level. We have, when our large claimants come in, they are large claimants. Our breast cancers, our colon cancers, and these types of things. We need the stop loss to be individual on those folks and not aggregate so that we can stop the claim earlier.
So we don't have aggregate.
Correct, we have individual. Thank you.
Are any of these claims where we're running a temperature, are they close to the specific?
No, currently, I do have my stop loss information with me. No, I have not had a breach yet this year. I expect a breach by probably third quarter, certainly, but I've not had a breach this year yet.
Okay, thank you.
Director Durkin, going back to Councilman Miller's question, you stated that you only are showing us January and that your projections is at the end of the year or the mid of the year, it'll level out. Could you provide us with, or have you looked at last January's? Have you
Certainly.
matched up this January's with last January's? You know, kind of like your gas bill where it shows you, yeah.
Certainly, and I will go ahead and email all of last 3 years' projections to the committee.
So are we over from last January?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
We always will have the carryover due to the timing. That's just the nature of the healthcare industry, the timing of when if someone is going to the doctor in December, that bill will not reach us until more like March. So that is the nature of the industry, so we always do have that. But again, that's in our projections. We have been running that way for the 15 years I'm aware of, or more like 10 that we've been self-insured, and it will continue to run that way. So I will get you the last 3 years of projections and email that to everyone.
And back to the original item before us, City of Euclid, that's new? This is I didn't see it on the last list.
This is new. This is new today, or new before you today, with their 327 employees, 2 medical mutual plans and a Metro Health Select plan. City of Euclid looked at us for quite some time. This is not the first quote we gave to the City of Euclid. I remember speaking to their HR director 2 years ago, began speaking with her, and so this has been something that they have eased themselves into. They were very cautious, and they were, had a lot of unions to speak with that we did go out and speak with. We went out to their council meetings, and we're finally able to, get the timing right with them. They were able to get the timing right with their union contracts and such, and so this is the end of a long path for the City of Euclid to join our regionalization program.
The last list, you updated us on 10/20 was only 14, so I see we're up to 18 now.
That's correct.
And I believe we recently passed a couple of the other cities. What were they again?
Yes, ma'am. Oh. We recently had Rita come on, the Southeastern Emergency Communications Center. We had,
South Euclid?
yes, South Euclid and Cleveland Heights, if you recall, was in, at the end of the year. They were effective September 1st. And as you recall, that was the large one. And so in the previous 6 months, the last 6 months, or kind of the last 3 months of 2014 and the first 3 months of 2015, we have literally doubled the amount of members in the regional healthcare program.
Now, I know all along we've talked about getting to that precipice where it might be too overwhelming for the county. Are we there yet?
No, ma'am. We have taken strides in our benefits division to make sure that our knowledge, skills, and abilities and manpower are growing along with our regionalization program. As we've spoke of before, you know that we do put in the overhead to cover all of the county's costs. That includes our personnel, our systems, our everything. And so we have made sure that we have grown with it. We had one of our senior folks from the benefits staff retire last fall, Dan Ritchie, and we replaced him with 2 incoming level folks, one of which, the reason why, was to be completely sure that we were keeping up with our regionalization demand. Our benefits manager, Eleanor Ha, also retired last summer, and Joni Harbaugh, who was another senior member of the benefits staff, was promoted to the benefits manager position, and we are still in the process of replacing her, and that will be another staff person to help out. But we actually have readjusted the workflow in the benefits department and readjusted our staffing and the way we do things to keep up with this demand, and I feel very confident about what we have done.
Okay. Any new cities in the remaining of this year and outlook for this year?
Currently, we have some quotes out there, but we do not have information that we're close on any. So I don't have any information for you right now, but I'm sure in another month or so, couple of months, I will hear something. Beginning of the year is always difficult because everybody's just begun with their bargaining unit contracts and the like. So end of the year is where the action happens usually.
Any other questions, Councilwoman Brown?
Thank you. I'm looking at some of the agreements. I see the City of Euclid's renewal date will take place at the end of 2017. And then we have South Euclid, who came on earlier this year through 2018, which is really only a day, but I'm just kind of trying to figure out why. Are there different renewal dates and the terms and timeframes of which they're established?
Certainly, to the chair, to the councilwoman. Certainly, we are looking at a number of different things. First of all, it's the time at which they vacated their last insurance contract and came in with us, and then we will kind of try to retrofit them into a 3-year contract. That is what we're doing. We don't always achieve that, but it's rare when we don't achieve that. And we're also looking for when is the next time they're going to go into major negotiations themselves with their unions, because there can be movement on this that they might want to take advantage of. So we do work with them on those dates.
To kind of piggyback off what the chair was speaking of with regards to upcoming contracts, I see the Board of Developmental Disabilities coming up towards the end of the year, as well as the county land bank. Are those in negotiation, or where are we on those contracts?
Yes, but to the chair, to the councilwoman, I do expect those to just automatically renew. And those are two of our happy, they're all happy members of the regionalization program. And usually we just go ahead and we repeat the paperwork and bring that before the committee.
And those are two of our oldest.
They are, yes, ma'am.
Any other questions in regards to Councilman Germana?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As long as, I don't want to belabor this because you do such a great job.
Thank
but
you.
I'm just noticing that most of the regional pick Medical Mutual, but if I'm reading the other charts right, we actually do more with United Healthcare overall than Medical Mutual, based on the deposits.
To the chair, to the councilman. So here's what I know from being the person that, handles this on a daily basis. When we go into a regional situation and we're looking to quote them, what we first and foremost look at, and what we are first and foremost requested to do, so it's not only advantageous for us, it's what the customer wants, is to quote them as close to what they have now or what they have going in. And the reason why is because most of the time that's easier for them to negotiate with their bargaining units on. And it's very comforting, and we know that because it's the same for all of us and all of our employees. It's very comforting to stay with as close to the same thing as you can have. But more so, it's much easier to negotiate with your bargaining units on. So a lot of these folks came from Medical Mutual, and Medical Mutual has been such a gracious vendor partner with us because, to be honest with you, and Medical Mutual and I speak about this often, what we do is we're taking business from one area of Medical Mutual and making them discount themselves and give it to us in another area. So that came with a lot of vendor relationship making that we had to do, but that works out well. United Healthcare does not quote as well as Medical Mutual to anyone, including our county. Our county employees who have United Healthcare are paying a higher premium than both Metro Health and Medical Mutual of Ohio. So it's the same in the regional. United Healthcare tends to come in higher and tends to then not get as much business. So for all of those reasons, we do have Metro Health, Medical Mutual of Ohio repeated much more often than we do United Healthcare. United Healthcare's rates being, more, and their percentages on claims being more, we usually do send them a lot of money, and you'll see kind of an offset there. So that's what's going on. A combination of those factors. Thank you.
And when we talk about negotiations, it's, are the insurance companies, they have a representative when we're talking about the city and their packages, or is it just the county and that prospective city that is at the table when we're discussing the regionalization agreements?
Yes, ma'am. So we, as the keeper and the, the agent of the regionalized healthcare program, we are the one who goes to the insurance company. We have the relationships there. We're putting these municipalities and organizations through our underwriting process. And that is an actuarial process that we are doing with Employee Benefits International. And so we want them first to go through our actuarial process to see, are they a good fit? Because our first and foremost job is to protect our risk pool. And are we going to be able, then we work with the companies to see, are we going to be able to give a quote to this city that is going to be beneficial to them and they can afford? And so it's really our job to be the steward of this. The company really does not come to the table with Cuyahoga County and the city, or Cuyahoga County and the city and their bargaining units. The company is really kind of that silent partner that we are working with via our healthcare contracts.
All right. Any other further questions? Hearing none, if someone can make a motion to, now before we do that, is there a rush on this?
As you always know,
Looking at the
these are brought to the council after the effective date and will be retroactive to the effective date. So we are always grateful when our council will set aside the rules and allow us to work outside of them.
All right.
That we move this to full council under suspension of the rules.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I hope we don't lose her. She's so knowledgeable.
All right, that concludes our matters that were referred to committee. We are now in the section of miscellaneous business, and we will have the pay equity study report presentation. And Rebecca, if you'd like to make introductions.
Good morning, Rebecca Kuczynski for the Personnel Review Commission. As you are probably aware, we engaged with a company last year start the process of fulfilling our obligations under the charter to ensure pay equity and like classifications and to administer compensation and classification systems that are based on merit and fitness. To that end, we retained Gallagher Benefit Services in one of the particular divisions, which happens to be run by Jim Fox, who's here with us this morning. Jim Fox is the managing director of the Compensation Consulting Services Division of the Arthur J. Gallagher Company, and he is here to present to you the same basic findings and recommendations that were presented to the PRC a couple of months back. So we appreciate the opportunity, and with that being said, I'll let him step forward.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You ready? Well, what I want to do is I want to summarize as succinctly as I can a report that's taken probably about 6 or 7 months and involved a lot of analysis and a lot of interviews and discussions with a number of people. But just to start off, let's just talk about what the county has set out as one of its goals in terms of pay practices for the non-bargaining classified employees, and that is to support an efficient and economical system for employment based on merit, fitness, and pay equity. To have a compensation philosophy that is defined and communicated to all impacted employees through supportive pay practices that demonstrate the principles of pay equity. And to have sound HR systems where employees' knowledge, skills, and abilities and overall performance are consistently rewarded throughout the county. And that we have administrative practices that are efficient and effective and assure that there is fairness. So this was our charge. This was the overall umbrella under which we looked at the current systems and practices and procedures of the compensation system. So we were asked to conduct a pay equity study for the non-bargaining. That's about 1,450 employees. To look at those pay practices to determine if they're based on merit and fitness, and then develop best practices, recommendations for ensuring that that occurs in the future. So here's what we started to do. We reviewed the policies and procedures. We looked at, we recommended guidelines for salary range placement and recommended an implementation schedule. So we started off with our focus groups. We had a focus group meeting, or focus groups meeting, with about 160 employees. We randomly selected them from a list of all of the employees, and had a number of those meetings. So we had 8 meetings and interesting discussions. There's a full report of just the focus group findings that we delivered. We also talked with the administrator of the PRC, the former director and current interim director of the Human Resources Department, and the former recruitment and retention manager, who was previously responsible for the compensation and classification program. Now, focus group results. It was kind of interesting to me, not being from Cleveland, but with all of the activity that's going on, that half the people, or more than half, don't understand what the PRC is all about. That was kind of interesting just by itself. Now, the rest of the findings were not very surprising in terms of my experience, but it's nonetheless something that needs to be addressed. That is, there's general dissatisfaction with the compensation and classification system, and I can tell you why when we get into a little bit further. And it appears that the application of those practices is inconsistent. It's perceived to be unfair and inconsistent in practice. There is pay compression between the supervisors and subordinates, generally because the subordinates are in a bargaining unit and the supervisors are not. And the bargaining unit employees have received raises, whereas the supervisors have not. So that causes compression. Now, what's the big deal about compression? The deal with compression is it causes morale problems. It's a silent killer.
Can you explain what compression means? I still don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, pay compression is the clearest example is when a supervisor is paid less than the people they're supervising. So let's say the supervisor gets paid $40,000. Maybe he's been here 10, 15 years, he or she, and the subordinates are making 45 or 50. It's an inversion. It's an inversion of pay, which, quite frankly, if you kind of believe in the school that the supervisor ought to be over the subordinates in terms of authority and direction and monitoring of their performance, it makes the supervisor's pay inconsistent with that concept. And so we find this, quite frankly, in a lot of organizations, a lot throughout the country, where the bargaining unit salaries continue to increase not every time, but traditionally they will go up, either through bargaining or through the way they apply their step raises every year. And yet those non-bargained employees who don't have the advantage, I guess, of a bargaining unit are not given increases in a consistent fashion. So their salaries slow down where the bargaining unit employees' salaries continue to increase.
I don't want to belabor and get off a topic, but couldn't that happen with natural attrition anyway? Even if, whether we're talking about classified or non-classified?
It could happen with natural attrition where a new employee comes in at the lower part of the range and a longer-term bargaining unit employee has been there for, is now at the top of the range because they've been there for a long time. That can occur, but typically that means there's a structural problem with the classification system, with how the jobs are graded and how the jobs are paid. Okay. So there may be some overlap, there usually is, especially when you get into protective services, fire and police, for example, that there's overlap between the firefighter and the captain role, which is the next one up, or the police officer and the sergeant. That's consistent. There is overlap. There is some pay compression there. There's also an issue of bargaining unit employees getting overtime and non-bargaining unit employees not necessarily getting overtime. So that aggravates the situation even more, even if the salary grades are not sufficiently far apart.
Thank you.
So, focus groups also viewed the current system as being unfair and poorly administered. So procedures for step movement within grades, so advancement within a grade based on usually a years of service within that job needs to be developed more specifically and communicated to employees because it's not understood and it's not really being applied consistently. So the county conducted a comprehensive classification study in 2005. Results were implemented in 2006. The 2005 examined the compensation levels in the market. Grade structure was adopted. There's a step-type system, which generally a step-type system operates in one of two ways. Every year that you have satisfactory performance, you move up a step, and those steps are generally 2 or 3% apart. The other way they operate, although less frequently in government, is based on a performance rating. You move up a step if your performance is better than satisfactory. But the way it operates here is generally if you're satisfactory, you should move up another step. But that's not being applied consistently. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, back in 2005, of course, that was under the county commissioner. So was this study across the board for all the different silos that we had?
You know, I'm not sure about that. Is this, Rebecca?
It was under the executive's administration.
So that'd be under the commissioners, not necessarily all the other offices?
If I may, to the councilman, at that time, under the commissioners, it was not anybody from the fiscal office, so we had the auditor, treasurer, and recorder were elected, sheriff was elected, clerk of courts was elected, coroner was elected, so all of those were not included in this study.
I think that's important for us to understand. Thank you.
Yeah. So the current compensation system has a step program. There's for exempt and non-exempt. Non-exempt are basically those people that are paid on an hourly basis. Two salary structures ranges about 40% wide. That's not atypical in government. Step plan includes 17 steps. 8 steps were 3% apart, and the next 9 steps 2% apart. So that's not unusual either. You want to move people up to the middle of the pay range quicker, and then once they get to the middle of the pay range, which is supposedly to represent what the market average is for that job, then you kind of slow it down. So the federal government has a similar kind of process. A lot of other organizations do as well. So prior to 2013, there had been no structural movements for the non-bargaining unit employees, though most bargaining unit employees and groups did get an increase. So that's contributed to that pay compression issue that I talked about. 2013 and 2014, the pay structure was increased by 1%, and then salaries were increased by 1% as a result. Then they were eligible for merit awards of up to $1,500 in 2013 and 2014, but these were not additive to base pay. So it was kind of like, I know it's kind of a bad word in government, a bonus. But you can't pay bonuses in government. Now, when you look at what the market's been doing, the market's been moving along at about 3.9% over the same period of time, so you're about 1.9% below the market, just kind of off the bat. Now, 1.9, 2% is not a significant deal. It's a significant deal if it continues, if that sort of degradation continues. And given the fact that you have pay compression issues, it just aggravates the situation even more. Every year there isn't some adjustment. Now, you know, I'm not in your position. I don't have financial responsibilities here, but at some point in time, it catches up to you and bites you. And it's about now that it's bitten you. I mean, I've done this, done similar kinds of analysis throughout the country, and while we all experienced the recession and the lower pay increases and the financial issues that caused for everybody, public and private organizations, people are now kind of waking up and saying, hey, we need to adjust our salaries because we are behind. Interestingly enough, during that period of time, the word on the street was nobody was getting a pay increase. You probably heard it. You probably said, yep, that's probably accurate. And it was absolutely a falsehood. 1/3 of the organizations were not giving pay increases in any particular year. The other 2/3 were. They weren't very big, but they were increasing. So now, 6, 7 years later, you look back and say, well, where are we? And you find out that you're way behind the market. And all of a sudden you say, how could that happen? If nobody was getting an increase, how come we're so far behind the market now? And that's because there was this theory that nobody was getting a pay increase, whereas many people were. And certainly where there's bargaining units, those contracts, you don't just void them on the day of the recession, whenever that occurred. Those go on to the next, and then you negotiate probably a lesser salary. But there is some adjustments. So right now, employees are unable to progress in the current structure. So if you get hired at a certain pay rate, within the pay range for your job, there's no policy or practice to govern movement through that pay range. Even though there are steps, there's nothing there that allows you to move through that in a consistent fashion. Okay, so it's sort of like, well, we've got this thing over here, but we don't use it. So why is that? Why is that the case? And if you talk about merit and fitness, if they've been hired based on their knowledge, skills, and experiences, and qualifies them for that position in a fair manner, then why aren't people moving through those ranges also in a fair manner? So frequently when someone applies for a job, they post the entire salary range from minimum to maximum. They get hired at a certain amount, certain level, maybe at the minimum, or maybe somewhere a little bit higher based on their experience because it's broader experience, and then they never move from that point. So I kind of equate this to driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour. You're zipping along at 70 miles an hour, but if everybody else is going at 70 miles an hour, you don't feel like you're moving anywhere. And so you can drive 2 or 3 hours down the freeway and feel like it's just kind of slow. But if you kick it up to 75, you're going somewhere. You're making progress. It feels like you're making progress. It's the same thing with pay ranges. You get hired in at a spot and you don't move through that range. 5, 10 years later, you're still at the same spot in that range that you were when you were hired. And you say, how come I'm not making any progress? And then a new employee comes in and they get hired maybe at the same level that you're paid at, or maybe a little bit more, because now the rules are interpreted a little bit differently. And you say, how come they're paid more than I am and they're doing the same thing? In fact, I have to probably train them to do the work. Because I'm fully competent. I've been here for 10 years doing this work and they're brand new. So, pay equity ordinance requires that pay advancement be based on employee skill level, education, experience, but there's no mechanism for making sure that that's applied appropriately. And you're not using the step plan as originally designed or intended. Exactly the discussion. Compression, again, back to this pay compression of non-bargaining unit employees with longer tenure being paid less than the same or recent hires with less tenure, or supervisors being paid less than direct reports who are members of the bargaining units. So we did an analysis of the years of experience versus placement in the pay range. Found virtually no correlation. We found patterns, rather disturbing patterns, in certain functions and areas, but we didn't see any pattern of 10 years of experience and an equivalent space in the range, or step in the range. So it makes you ask the question, if you are based on merit and fitness, where's the merit and fitness? Because it doesn't seem to be consistent with just common sense.
So when you talk about you went back and compared, how far did you go back? Just under the new government structure, or did you include that?
It was just the most recent year, yeah. We did not go historically back and say, is there a trend? So, yeah, that would be interesting. All right, so come to some conclusions here, some of which we've touched on, some of which we dealt with in our full report, which you were a pleasure to read, I'm sure.
Did you have a question, Council?
I'm sorry.
On that point?
I'm just wondering, when you're doing this comparison, was it just governmental or was it all employment? Where we're not, we're
Keeping with the
compressed, we're not-
market?
Right,
Oh, this is specific to public
public.
employment, yes, in the central region. So that's as narrow as we could get it, so. Yeah.
Okay, so then I just wanted to make sure that we weren't,
Yep, comparing apples
Okay,
and
thanks.
oranges and other kinds of fruit characters, yeah, right. Perfect. So, class specifications, position descriptions. You've got two different forms, kind of an old form and a new form. So they're inconsistent in the information they contain. Some of them lack critical data, such as the Fair Labor Standards Act designation of exempt or non-exempt. And the classification structure is unnecessarily complex. In other words, there's some inconsistencies within the classification structure and the subsequent grade structure. Here's the critical thing that I find rather disturbing is that we have not sat down as an organization at any point did we find any information that the county has said, we want to be paid comparative to these kinds of organizations. Now, your question, was the labor market the public sector? Yes, it was. But the county hasn't defined that that's the public sector, that that's the market. And in some positions, only county government has those positions. In others, other governments have those positions. And then there are some jobs, IT, HR, finance, purchasing, for example, where there's both public and private employers. And so it helps to define within an organization, who is that labor market? What size are they? How comparable are they? Are you comparing it on number of employees, revenue size, or budget, as the case may be, or other characteristics, regional area, and so on and so forth? Hasn't been, we couldn't find any definition. So, with regard to that, why does that matter? Well, it matters if someone says, we're not paid comparative to the market. Well, we haven't defined it, so we've got no standard on which to base the comparison. In many positions that we look for data, there's no market data. There's no comparable market data. Now, that's not a critical fault, because you can make up for it with other mechanisms. For example, the Archer system helps you to make up for those jobs where you don't have market data based on how it's ranked. Salary ranges are not developed in a consistent manner. In other words, there's inconsistencies between one grade and another, the differences between those percentages. So that raises questions as to how was it developed, under what basis, under what logic, under what systematic process. Pay compression, we've talked about that, that's an issue. Again, let me just make another note on pay compression. This is a problem that every organization, everywhere I go, has a problem with. Some of it is worse than others. The problem of pay inversion, where supervisors get paid less than subordinates, that I feel is probably a very critical issue. There's not a lot of organizations that have that. But where I do find it, it's usually because there's bargaining unit and non-bargaining unit employees. And so there's a disconnect there. And I get it, quite frankly, I get it. You know, you're kind of, you don't have to, but you do negotiate, and in good faith, you make your best effort, they make their best effort. The non-bargain unit employees, it's kind of at the will of the council. And we're always trying to save money, so that's where we save the money. And generally, they tend to be the higher paid employees, so there's less compassion for those jobs. But that causes that pay compression, which then, here's what happens in reality. Good employees that get to the top of their range, if they're part of the bargaining unit, do not want to become non-bargained employees because they'll take a pay decrease or they'll suffer other consequences. That's not good for the longevity of the organization, especially when you have a lot of people over the next several years who are going to be retiring and leaving the workforce. You want to keep the opportunities for promotion ahead, and that restricts that ability to do that. So, those are some of the issues. Here's some of our recommendations. You need a formal philosophy, a compensation philosophy to guide the overall strategy. So you've got this merit and fitness, these words in it, but we've got to make that into reality. We've got to put it in more distinct terms in terms of how do we want to pay people, where do we want to compare to other organizations, and where in relationship to those or other organizations do we want to pay? We want to pay about the average, a little bit below, a little bit better than. So this strategy should not only focus on the current situation, but moving forward, because strategies, a pay philosophy strategy and strategy really is a communication document. It says, here's what we stand for, here's what we are going to set our principles upon, and here's what's going to guide our decisions, the overall framework for guiding our decisions. Now that means that has to be communicated to the employees effectively and completely. And the fact that many of the people don't even know who the PRC is a little disturbing, so we need a little more communication. Now, we can always say that. We can always say we should communicate more and better. But we need a whole lot more here because there's just a gap in the knowledge, a gap in the trust, a gap in the morale. More specific kinds of things, we need to update the class specifications to the current new form, which includes all of the pertinent information, and make sure they match the work being performed so that they're accurate. Ensure that the data, such as years of experience and essential duties, is complete in all forms for the minimum requirements. Now, here's the way the jobs ought to be organized, quite frankly. This will make it much simpler, much easier to understand, and more consistent. And once you get those kinds of things, you get transparency. And when you get transparency in a compensation classification system, you get understanding. And once you get understanding, you get better acceptance. And that's what you want to get to. But you need to create job families, occupational groups, finance, HR, IT, those kinds of things. And then within each one of those occupational groups, you need to rank order the jobs based on their complexity and responsibility within that job family. That will help level the jobs appropriately. And I know that the Archer system helps to do that, but we need to organize it by job families so that there is some consistency, not only within the family, but across families. So for example, the title specialist appears in all kinds of different job titles throughout the county, throughout these 1,450 jobs. And they are all kinds of different pay levels. Now for me, if I were an employee and I'd say, well, I'm a specialist, and another person in another department says, well, I'm a specialist in this department. How come you're in grade 10 and I'm in grade 5? Shouldn't that mean the same thing? Or approximately the same thing? And it doesn't. And so that's where this consistency and understanding and transparency helps out. We need to define who the labor market is. And that may be different by different types and levels of positions. So for example, as you move up the organization to directors, that may be a different, broader market than you might find for the non-exempt hourly. So the Cleveland area or greater Cleveland area is probably where the hourly employees, that market is. And we have to define the extent of public organizations and private organizations. Then we need to identify where in relationship to that market we ought to pay. If we have absolutely wonderful benefits, maybe we can pay a little bit lower on salary, but understand that other governments also have wonderful benefits. So that's sort of a competitive advantage that's taken out, but you are way ahead of the private sector on benefits. Even if you reduce that over the years, it's a good thing. One bright light, huh? Then you need to survey a list of benchmark jobs, those that are found in those other organizations in the same fashion. Now, there's a technique about how you collect the data. You need to decide that, define where the data is coming from for each occupational data, from each occupational group, collect that market data, develop that salary structure based on the alignment of midpoints and market data, consistent with your compensation philosophy. Then, and here's the thing that everybody falls apart on, there's a thing called adjustment of employee pay. Now, you've got a step plan. It's not being used, but nevertheless, you have one. It's not a bad thing. Many organizations are trying to get to performance-based pay, but that's a struggle. That is a struggle. But the structure ought to move a little bit differently than the amount of pay that an employee can achieve. So here's what they do in the private sector. And I think this is a good model. And this may help solve some of your problems. The salary structure, the minimums, maximums, are moved about 1 or 1.5% per year. Now, the market for employees is moving ahead at about 3% a year right now. So employees are getting on average 3%, where the structure, the minimum max, is only moving 1.5%. Now, you can see just from that example that the employees feel like they're going to be moving through the range. And that reduces the possibility, doesn't eliminate, reduces the possibility of pay compression in the future. Most governments do it this way. What's the cost of living? 3%? Let's adjust the minimum and maximum. Let's adjust everybody at the same rate. So if you got stuck at this point when you got hired, you're always at that spot in the range 10 years later, unless you move through on a step. And if you're not moving through the steps, then you're stuck there. You're not feeling like you're moving. And that's when pay compression happens. So there's a simple adjustment that you can make to fix the future. It's not going to be, you're not going to fix it overnight. I mean, I don't think there's enough money here to fix it overnight. And you shouldn't. You should take your time, but then put in place procedures and practices that don't continue that practice. Now,
Yes, Councilman Miller.
Do I get the sense of what you're saying that if inflation is averaging 3%, that maybe you move the structure only 1% on 1.5%, but you also allow the process to work where people can move up the structure, so that the combination of the two gives them something like an inflation level of movement, where in fact if you did the whole thing by moving the structure, well then nobody's going to move through the system. Is that kind of what you're driving at?
it's exactly what I'm driving at. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So there are some other recommendations in terms of salary range spreads and grade differences, and how to structure that. We think that would make a whole lot of sense. Now, to the extent that you want to move to performance-based pay, it's a challenge, but probably worthwhile. If you do that, we'd recommend that you divide your ranges into 4 quartiles, 4 equal spaces. The lowest quartile being for those that are starting off or minimal performance and moving up to maximum performance. And we provided some recommendations in the full report in terms of how to manage that pay structure based on performance and placement in the range. So we've provided that. So we're making recommendations that employees should progress through the ranges, those new ranges based on merit and fitness. Now, what does that mean? It means performance, it means experience. It means acceptable or better than acceptable performance in the job, in their duties and responsibilities. And again, I've talked here about the merit increase and the structure increase so that there is a slower movement of the salary structure than it is for the people themselves. And here's the toughest part, here's the toughest recommendation to make this work and to reduce the pay compression issues in the future and to add some validity to the process. And that is, we need to make some progress towards advancing non-bargaining salaries at a rate that's reasonably equivalent to the bargaining unit salaries as they've increased. We have some recommendations in terms of communicating with employees, various issues. We looked at some appeal decisions and audit requests. And while there isn't really any standard in terms of appeals or audit requests, it appears that this has been somewhat of a way for people to move themselves through the range. So if you can't get it through the normal procedures, if those aren't operating, then we try another mechanism. So there's some issues with regard to that. So next steps from our perspective, PRC reviews and approves the report, then develops a list of initiatives based on the findings and recommendations that we've made, maybe some additional recommendations as well that they see are important to make based on the findings that we've provided. And then I would recommend the PRC defining a governance group, I guess, to oversee these changes, just to make sure that they're on track, they're on schedule, and they fit with other considerations throughout the county. That there be an implementation schedule so we know when and how this will be done, and these things be communicated to those affected 1,450 employees, or whatever the current number is. At the end of the year, PRC ought to review the progress and success of the changes that are made in the previous year, and then make adjustments as necessary. All of the changes that need to be made, you need to circle back and say, did we accomplish what we accomplished? Is there anything that we learned in that process that perhaps we ought to tweak going forward? Because you don't really want to say, that's final, we're done with that, we're never going to think about it again. You've got to keep evolving. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, the committee will have some questions for you. Go ahead, Councilman.
A couple things, that come to mind, so I can just make some remarks, and then you could help clarify them into my mind. I'm looking at how this got out of whack, and especially with the raises and so on. But I've been a couple decades in government. All of a sudden, when this recession hit, government, only has so much money. We don't print money. There was a time when there were furloughs. Bigger cities started furloughs. The bargaining groups, you take furloughs, or we're going to get rid of people because we got to balance the budget. Got to balance the budget. So there's that mentality of, we don't need a raise. I just want to keep my job. I don't want to have to. Well, in a certain respect, some employees like the time off, even though without pay. But that caused the mentality of, I want to keep this job. My other thought about this benefits part, and things that have changed, has to do with pre-existing conditions, if you're insured and you have a problem with somebody in your household, you might not want to go into, you get a job in the private sector because of pre-existing conditions, depending if it's a big outfit or not, and so on. But that kind of has changed with the change in healthcare. And then I guess the other thing that comes to mind is the PERS system better than the Social Security system? And is that another reason why people will, I hate this job, I'm not getting any raises, but I got good benefits, and then there's the retirement. How does the PERS system compare to Social Security? So those are a couple of things that were going through my mind.
And rightly so, quite frankly. Yeah, I get it, that when there's no money, there were furloughs, we cut back on other non-essential items, training, for example, maybe some promotions and that sort of thing, and it happened all over the country. There was, it impacted our organization as well. But I think when people have started to come out of the recession, they've taken a look around and said, we still need good people. We still need talented people. And if we're going to attract them and keep them, we need to pay a reasonably competitive wage. Now, even if you were 10 or 15% below the market, this pay compression issue is a cancer. It's a cancer that you've got to fix. You can fix it, but you can't let it grow. And that'll do more damage than the flip side of saying, well, you're 15% below the market, let's give you an increase of 15%. The pay compression issue is more serious than a lower amount of pay because of the other considerations. And those are the ones that you mentioned. Healthcare, which is generally very good in government, and the retirement. Now, we did not take a look at the retirement, but I can pretty much guarantee you that it's better than Social Security. In addition, and again, I didn't take a look at the program, so I don't know how yours is organized, but it's about 5 years when all of a sudden you're vested. Not all of a sudden, but you are vested. And that's a retention. That's a retention tool. Because now you're in the system, you understand your work, you understand how government works, you understand how the county works and your opportunities and that sort of thing. But there is, at that some point in time, a pretty nice retirement that up until now hasn't been taken away. So those are attractive features, not to be diminished, but there's other things that need to be addressed as well. Now, how do things get out of whack over time? They just do. I don't know why. People change, the jobs are changing all the time, and we don't necessarily keep up to date. Or we have people that have job audits, and that job gets changed, but somebody over here is doing the same thing that probably wasn't as aggressive, didn't ask for an audit, and now they're out of whack. And so if you do that over 10, 15 years, pretty soon you got a system that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's inconsistency.
Just to follow up before, I'm thinking that the county and what we've gone through, it reflects also the same thing that's happening in our municipalities throughout the county.
Could be.
I'm just wondering if your firm ever gets involved in cities doing this thing, and I'm just wondering. My guess is that what the county's gone through, the cities are going through the same type of thing, And, you know, with collaboration, you know, we might be taking our steps, we might be helping cities solve some of their problems.
Well, we are engaged by organizations, cities, counties, states, other public organizations throughout the country. So we see it from all different aspects. We do have a number of engagements, a lot with counties, quite frankly, right now in Ohio. And, you know, your problems are not unique. I mean, you're not the only one in the US that has these problems, but you've taken a step to look at them, to see what they are, to see whether there's some issues that can be addressed. And so that's what our job is to tell you where you've got problems and what you can do to fix it. Now, could we fix every organization? Maybe, if we had enough time.
Councilman Miller?
Madam Chair, to Mr. Fox, first I want to thank Gallagher for doing a fine study for us. I participated in some of this. I attended a couple of the focus groups. I've read the reports, and I think you certainly gave us something that we can work with at a reasonable cost. And government can't do everything by itself. We depend on to contract with people, and sometimes we get what we're looking for, and sometimes it falls a little short. You know, so I just want to give credit where credit was due, and say that you've done very well for us, and I appreciate that. One question that I'd like to ask about is about the correction of disparities. You pointed out that as to where people are located within their pay grade, that there's very little correlation between their years of experience and presumably other metrics of merit and fitness and what they're actually receiving. Right. And my question is how do we correct that? Do we do an evaluation of everybody and lower some and raise others, or do we do an evaluation of everybody and the ones that are too high, we freeze them in place for a while, and the ones that are too low, we give them a little larger than normal increase on an annual basis until they catch up to where they should be? Or what do you think?
Well, I've never been a fond a proponent of reducing person's salary. And under certain circumstances, it probably makes some sense, but under this, no. So that means that you would freeze their salary if they are over where you think it makes sense based on those principles of merit and fitness, and bring up the pay of those people that are underpaid in relationship to the same standards. Now, there's a million ways to do this to make it fairer. But there ought to be an approach to start that process. So, for example, we get involved in this with a lot of our clients. We put together a minimum price adjustment by person according to a formula, and then a very high cost, which would fix it all at once, as much as we could. And that's usually about 2 or 3 times the cost, and nobody can afford that. And nobody wants to do just the minimal amount, so there's usually some alternative in between. Or it's done over a period of 2 or 3 years. So there's a number of different approaches that could work and probably should be taken, but I wouldn't reduce anyone's pay.
Okay. the second question I would ask is how much priority would you give to the notion that we can't fix everything that currently exists, but we should give a very high priority to ensuring that every new person that we hire gets properly evaluated and entered at the right place on the pay system, and that we have a plan in place that they can reasonably and properly progress through the system, so that that over time, as employees retire and cycle out of the system, theoretically, you get a system that's more and more on target as the new employees are being brought in at the right place and given the right opportunities to progress. Is that a good strategy?
Let me put it this way. I think first priority is to make sure that the new employees are getting placed in the appropriate spot. But if you don't accompany that by fixing the current employees, it will be like adjusting the balance of the right tire when the entire alignment is out of whack. You'll fix that right tire for a short period of time, and pretty soon it'll get wobbly again. So you've got to do both. Fixing one is not the answer. Fixing both is the answer. And that's, quite frankly, the tougher one to do.
Okay. Final question for now. It's about the question of job audits. We didn't discuss it too much during your presentation, right. but in the more detailed report, you talked about it quite a bit, and at the focus groups that I attended, there was a widespread consensus that the current process just doesn't work, and that people apply for these job audits, and it takes a very long time, and often they feel like the work that they're actually performing isn't properly considered, and as a county council person, I've gotten a significant number of constituent inquiries along this line, and so my question is do you have recommendations about improving the job audit process, and if so, what are they?
Yeah, they're pretty comprehensive, actually. And here's what I recommend. First of all, you have to have a system that's structurally sound. Because if you don't have a structurally sound system that makes sense, logical, and there's clear distinctions between one job and another, and you don't move people through the pay ranges according to the guidelines that you have established, you are going to get job audits. And because you don't have a system that is structurally sound, in our opinion, the finite comparisons that you're making in audits is very difficult to make, because there's lack of granularity between one class and another. So here's a term that I use all the time. How much of a difference makes a difference? I don't know the answer to that. But let me give you a comparison, completely out of compensation. Have you gone into a paint store lately? And you look at the variety of colors and shades and tints, and you go from one product, maybe it's Benjamin Moore, and then you go over to another product, and it's Pratt Lambert or whatever the other, and they all have their own sets of tints, and there's no match between one company and another. And so let's say your spouse says, let's go paint this room off-white. You got about 50 choices. And if you look at one chip and another, right next to each other, yeah, you can see a difference. But if you spread them 10 feet apart, you can't see the difference. And so either one of them will work. And that's what you've got. You've got a paint chip store. And so someone come in and says, my job has changed. And it's like paint chips next to each other. Yeah, I can see a difference here, but when I get out here, I can't see a difference. And for humans to make that decision, when the presumption is that we're going to move up, humans making that distinction that's consistent across the entire spectrum of jobs within that 1,450, if that's all that we're looking at, 1,450 employees, is doggone difficult. Now, I can tell you, we did some work for a Miami-Dade County, 30,000 employees. Unionized, they have 3,000 job descriptions for all of their people. They think, they're not sure. They have 300 to 400 job audit appeals, or whatever you want to call it, reclassification requests every month. They have 11 people looking at these and making decisions, and 97% of them are approved. They have so much paint chips, so many paint chips, nobody knows whether they're looking at the blues or the reds anymore. And they can't tell the difference. So the inclination is to move them up to the next pay grade or the next 2 pay grades to approve their appeal, to approve their audit. Now, so I'm suggesting that there are some issues there. So you need to get your system structurally sound so that humans can make reasonably consistent decisions from person to person whenever they make the audit. Now, with regard to timing, if you have something that is structurally sound and granular, you can make those decisions faster. And that's really what you ought to do to respond to employees. There's really no reason why those things should go on for longer than 45 days. 30 to 45 days would be perfect. Now, you know, they got other work to do, but it shouldn't take as long as it does. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Councilman? Go right ahead, Councilman Greenspan.
All right, thank you. I've got a couple points, couple questions. So putting titles aside, are the employees adequately compensated for the job duties in which they're assigned? Forget titles.
Yeah, we did not do a market competitiveness assessment. All we did was we looked at the trend in what the county has provided to those employees in terms of pay adjustments, and then what the market has done over a similar period of time. And you're behind with that. So I don't know. I'm assuming that when the 2005 study was done, that people were brought up to speed or reasonably up to speed. But we did not go out to the market and say, are we paid competitively with the market?
All right, so maybe let me rephrase that. Internally within the county, when you look at the job functions of an employee from one unit to another, in a comparative perspective, are they adequately or comparatively compensated? Forget for the subject of this question,
Yeah.
whether they're being compensated to market rates within the organization. Is for the job duties performed across departments, are they compensated equally or competitively?
No.
They're not. Okay. The part of the recommendations that you made, I didn't see what the proposed budget impact may be. And as we're getting ready in October to start reviewing the 2016-2017 budget, obviously the departments are going to very shortly, if they haven't already, start to compile their budgets. What type of budget impact, and I'm talking not only from a compensation salary perspective, but from a PERS perspective, might we be looking at if the PRC should so adopt or recommend, and it's adopted, your recommendations.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity that PRC can do. They need staff. They've ramped up staff lately, so I assume that those costs.
No, I'm talking about, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm talking about if your recommendations here to bring people to market who are not at market.
I see.
What does that look like to the employees of the county?
We have not made an estimate on the cost of pay adjustments that we would probably find, or the cost of adjusting the structure. So we've not made that.
Is that part of the scope of your
That
engagement?
was not part of the scope, as far as we understood.
Pardon me?
As far as we understood.
Okay. Because it's going to be important for us to understand not only operationally what the implementation costs are going to be, but also the true budget impact. 'Cause
Absolutely.
From my perspective, it's been said that I'm tighter than bark on a tree, but I got to tell you, you got to pay your employees adequately for the job they're doing. And if that means we compensate them more, then we need to do that. I am also aware of the non-bargaining unit challenges and the compression challenges, which have been, in my opinion, an unfair practice in the county, and I'm glad that you addressed that. One thing I don't see, and I came in late, but I tried to skim through here, is I've also been, in my professional life, I've overseen HR as well, and have focused significantly on retention and training and development. But I didn't see any recommendations in here other than the underlying assumption that if you pay people more money, they're going to stay. What type of retention or training and development practices are you recommending in order to reduce the attrition?
Yeah, we, excuse me, we did not address the training requirements or
Was that not
or
your scope?
recommendation. It was a little out of scope, I think, at least from our perspective. But when I talk to employees, they say we a couple of things. We want to be paid fairly. We want to be paid competitively. We want to have an opportunity to grow. And so we've addressed the first two issues in terms of some problems. The opportunity to grow is not only in pay, but also an opportunity for learning and expanding their capabilities. And I think that's essential. Look, just from my experience, I came from an organization that you had to do 40 hours of training every year, to an organization now that there's no such requirement. And I feel like I'm left out somewhere. I'm not up to date. So.
Okay, all right, so just the two takeaways from this is that it was not in your purview, not in your scope to provide a financial measurement to
Correct.
these operational recommendations, nor was training and development or retention part of the scope.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Jimana, then Miller.
I'm just wondering about the longevity. Do we have a lot of employees that are going to be retiring soon, or is it even? Do we? Where do you know?
I don't know that. I didn't look at the age makeup of the employee population. I'm sure the HR department probably has done that and would have a reasonably accurate estimation of sort of the estimated retirement flow over the next 10 years or so. I mean, by
think-
logical standards, it's going to happen, whether it's not, you're not unique. You didn't hire a bunch of 20-year-olds last year, so.
I happen to be one of these baby boomers that, and in the industry that I'm in, in a few short years, they got to replace a heck of a lot of people. I'm just wondering if the county is got a lot of baby boomers that are going to be gone, and I think if that's the case, it may be easier to fix because if we freeze the fix on people that were within a few years of retirement. And I'm just wondering, and if we could possibly get that idea of the aging of, well, at least as many years in the system, and that would give us some kind of idea of how people will be coming off of and retiring.
Gives you an opportunity.
Thank you.
Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, if I might, I'd like to ask a few questions of Ms. Kupczynski at PRC. The first couple questions relate to current status, and the first question is based on Gallagher studies. Do we currently have an accepted pay range for most or all of our employees?
I guess I'd ask you to define a little further what you mean by an accepted pay range.
For all the pay grades, have we decided? Do we have information based on reasonably recent data as to what the minimum and the maximum for that pay grade should be?
Okay, yeah, so now I understand. Thank you. There is an existing structure. That structure has been in place for a number of years. It was modified in 2013 and 2014 by a 1% adjustment that moved the whole thing forward. Each pay grade in that system is built on essentially the Archer system, which is a point factor evaluation system. So each pay grade is defined by a number of points that are allocated through the assessment of a number of what they call compensable factors. And Albert, if you want to shed any light on this, feel free, because he's worked with it much longer than I have. But those pay ranges are very clearly established and founded on that point factor system. So that structure is firmly built and established, and there is a solid quantitative and qualitative analysis that goes into the determination of which jobs belong in which pay grades.
Okay. Second question is based on that structure that you have in place. Are all or almost all of the 1,450 employees at least making the minimum and not making more than the maximum?
Yes.
Okay. Third question is does the PRC support, or have you made a decision as to whether you support the system of going to the 4 quartiles within pay grades as opposed to the current 17-step system?
I don't know that the commission has had a particular conversation about that. I think that consideration has occurred in the context of a discussion about the need to establish criteria to help people figure out where to put individuals in those pay ranges. So the quartiles is one approach that could be used to do that. If we operate with the existing 17 steps, if we're not moving people along those steps on the basis of simply another year of adequate performance, then there needs to be some criteria developed to underline where people are placed in those pay bands. And the quartile one, obviously, is easier to do than a 17-step system.
For what it's worth, I would just say that I don't think the current system is working. And part of the problem is that we kind of have an unwritten rule that you can get halfway through it and then that's it. So we don't even use the 9 through 17 very much, as I understand it.
It's my understanding as well.
Okay. Final question is it was included in the report that pay grades should be combined when there's less than a 5% difference between their midpoints. And the question is whether the PRC is prepared to recommend doing any of that.
We are just beginning the process of actually looking at analyzing the way that structure is built. So I'm not even sure which ones have a difference. If you could speak to that, Albert, I don't know if you know either. It's early in our analysis. I would think within the week we would be able to answer this question more thoroughly, but right now I don't think I can.
Okay, and I would close by saying that I think that one of the really strong points about the Gallagher study is that they recommended taking a comprehensive and methodical approach and building a structure and implementation using an overall plan. And I think it's very important that we do that, and it's I'm sure it would take a number of years to implement it, but we should do it methodically over a period of time rather than a few steps here or there, kind of hit and miss, and I think that would get us there. Thank you.
Administrator Kopinski, the classification and structural recommendations presented by Arthur Gallagher, do we have in your office, do you have the capability to address these issues?
We have begun to address some of the recommendations in terms of cleaning up the classification specifications, for example. We have begun that work. We know we currently have a full-time manager for classification and compensation administration, and we were just recently able to bring on another full-time classification and compensation specialist. So those people's work right off the bat is going to be working on doing what we know is sort of the low-hanging fruit here, which is cleaning up those documents and making sure that they're accurate and that they're consistent across the organization. Beyond that, I think the challenge is how quickly does the work need to get done? And I don't know that we know the answers to that right now. I think that the longer the implementation is drawn out, the less likely this is to be an effective solution. But that being said, I don't know that I can say to you we need 2 or 3 or 4 more people at the PRC to do this work. We have had some initial discussions. We're looking at doing a comprehensive labor analysis basically to estimate what the hours are that are involved in looking at against our current structure. But I'm reluctant to say we have adequate staff on board today to do it, just because we haven't gotten to the point that we've looked at an implementation schedule to see how long it's going to take.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for the law department, and then I guess about 3 for the consultant. So Amy, the PRC reviews and approves, in the next steps in this presentation, states that the PRC reviews and approves reports from the HJG. In viewing this list of next steps for the PRC, are they consistent with the charter as it stands today?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, the next steps are listed as developing a list of initiatives to implement the recommendations of the plan, to define a governance body to oversee the changes, to create an implementation schedule, to communicate changes and implement the schedule, to review progress, and to adjust changes as appropriate. So currently, the charter gives the PRC the authority to administer a classification and compensation plan. So I believe the recommendation would be that the PRC works together with the executive HR department to really review and implement what the recommendations are. Yeah. Sure.
Mr. Morales?
Madam Chair, Ed Morales for the Law Department. I think the simple answer is no. the way the recommendations are phrased gives, they don't comply or correspond to the charter with regards to the role of council as opposed to the role of the PRC. The PRC has the role of administering a class plan, but council has the role of, and the executive has the role of really making decisions regarding paying employees and implementing a project to deal with the equity issues that exist. So I think that to actually take the steps that are necessary to implement or to address the problems that have been identified, and I think identified correctly, will require legislative action and will require the cooperation and participation of the executive through the Department of Human Resources.
Now, I knew this would be a sticky point because it brings us all back to where we are. I agree with you on one end that the administration, we can't have an independent body determining what our financial capabilities are. But then on the other hand, we still need, they were designed in the charter to do specific things. So in my mind, and being equitable, we've got to all work together.
Well,
You got the money in, and you've got us as the balance to that money in, and then their point of view when they're talking about looking at from the appeal process. So I don't want us to get stuck. I think we've been stuck many months on this one thing. Now, I know you and Mike have been working on some things. Have you had any conversations with Rebecca? Have you had any meetings? Because I know you're working from the administration side. Mike is looking out for our interest. Have we come together with the PRC to get over this hump, so to speak?
we the issues that Mike and I have been Mike King and I have been working on correspond to the issue that was raised with the PRC with regard to the Administrative Procedures Ordinance. And yes, we have consulted with the counsel for the PRC, the county prosecutor, and also the staff attorney for the PRC was present in that meeting. So we are awaiting a response from the prosecutor's office. We made a proposal with regard to changes to the code that would address issues that were raised by the PRC with regard to the Administrative Procedures Ordinance. And the response was that it's something that the PRC the parties can work with, and I think we'll be able to address the concerns of the PRC. But we're waiting for a proposal to come back to us.
Was there a time put on that?
My understanding was it would happen within the next week or so.
And when was it presented to them?
It was, I think it's about a week and a half.
And who's spearheading that? Is that you spearheading?
Yes.
All right.
With the law director, Mr. Trowsey.
Okay. Councilman Miller.
I think the issue over the Administrative Procedures Board is unfortunate, but I think as I read the Gallagher study report, I read that report as a recommendation to Cuyahoga County and not just to the PRC. And I think it goes without saying, as you stated, that anything of this complexity would require a collaborative effort by the PRC, the executive, the human resources department, and the council, and I hope and expect that we'll all work together and make that happen. And I think that hopefully the administrative review board conflict can be worked out, but I think that can be on a separate track.
Oh, I agree totally, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, second question that I have for the law department. In the past, we've conducted a PACE equity study for the county's non-bargaining unit class. So for the bargaining unit, we have had lawyers that sat and negotiated and things like that. Has there ever been lawyers assigned for the bargaining unit employees of the county, or any thoughts given to assigning lawyers to dealing with the non-bargaining? Like we sit down every year and negotiate. Under Majid's leadership and probably Triazi, has it ever been discussed? Because I think the consultant brought that up. I mean, you can work year after year with the bargaining units, but if you're not doing that same kind of system with the non-bargaining, you're going to get these issues that we have. So I was just wondering, has there ever been any thought to start conversations like that? Of course, you know.
Madam Chair, there has been no discussion with regard to the law department having a role in advocating for or making a recommendation about non-bargaining compensation. So no, that hasn't happened. But as I heard the recommendation from Gallagher, it focused on a consistent keeping increases for non-bargaining employees consistent and moving at the same pace as for bargaining employees. And that has always been a function of the executive and council. So to me, that becomes a recommendation coming from the executive to council each year.
It makes sense, you know, I know it's our role and our responsibility, but those lawyers that have worked with those negotiations, they have valuable information in order to get us on track if the administration is to accept something like that. You're more knowledgeable about what those negotiations have been ongoing for the past two budgets that we have. So that would easily be correlated into
I see the point that you're making, and no, there has been no discussion along those lines, but certainly the law department would be willing to cooperate if that was a function that the executive and council wanted to see us undertake.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from Mr. Morales? Councilman Greenspan?
I'm sorry, enough, Mr. Morales, just, I don't know to whom some of these questions, well, yes, I do have a question, Mr. Morales. But before I answer that or ask that question, let me just make a general statement regarding the budget. Once again, I touched on it earlier to whomever is responsible for this. Basically, my message is giddy up. Who's ever going to be putting recommendations forward that's going to impact the budget, whether it's a policy decision or other types of decisions that need to be made. Understanding we're under tight financial constraints, we all recognize that, but we need to understand as we prepare this budget what's going to be impacted as a result of this study. And I would envision that we have less than 5 months to get it together, so we understand what we're going to be looking at as a council starting in October in that review. I guess to Mr. Morales, is there some type of confusion between the roles and responsibilities of the PRC and HR as it relates to this issue? Because I'm looking at the charter, it seems pretty clear what the shalls are for both, and I'm just curious if there's a confusion or conflict that's arising.
Well, my view is that there is a great deal of ambiguity in Article 9 of the Charter. I think is it 9.02 has 4 or 5 subdivisions, which speaks to the responsibilities and authority of the Personnel Review Commission, but the language that is used and the lack of enforcement mechanisms, I think, gives rise to significant ambiguity. For example, 9.02 states that the Personnel Review Commission has the authority to ensure. How do you operationalize that? There's a great deal of ambiguity regarding that issue.
Let me interrupt and ask you this on that point. In November of 13, we put this item before the electorate to make some amendments, and it was done at that time. Why was that ambiguity not addressed then? Obviously, I can understand in the original adoption of the charter in 2010 or 2009, but why did we not clarify that at that point? Because to clarify that now is a charter amendment.
Agreed, and I think there probably is a need for a future charter amendment. The only answer I can give to that to that question is that there were a number of competing priorities with regard to the development or changes that were deemed necessary with the charter. I don't know the thought process that went along with the precise amendments that were offered and voted on by the citizens of the county, but in my mind, there's no doubt that the additional change needs to be made to clarify the article.
Okay, I can't, as a member, I'm not on this committee, but I can, as a council member, ask if you can write a what the concerns are from the law department, whether it's you or Mr. Triazzi, so we understand this. Because the way I look at it is the PRC has its defined shall functions, and the Human Resource Department, basically it says in the charter, shall perform such functions on behalf of the PRC, and the commission, the PRC, shall they delegate. So to me, it seems a little, I don't interpret it as loosely as maybe as the questions you're raising. So I'd like to see what those questions are. PRC is independent of the Human Resource Department by charter design to provide such guidance, and the HR is to enforce, as the charter is written, the various elements that the PRC is charged with. So I don't understand the ambiguity. So if you can help, not right now, but if you can help clarify that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
All right, thank you.
You had other questions?
No, that was it.
Okay. To the consultant,
Excuse me.
yes,
Chairwoman, if I could just speak to one of the issues. I don't disagree with Ms. Morales. I think that the PRC has looked very carefully at its role under this charter and has been working since day one to articulate its role in this new form of government. I think that while we may engage in some conversation about where there is ambiguity that needs to be clarified in the charter, I think it's absolutely let me step back. It is simply not ambiguous at all that the charter gives the PRC the authority and the responsibility for administration of a classification and compensation systems. And I think if you'll remember, as to the history that preceded the creation of the new government and the role of this agency, one of the reasons that we understand the charters, the authors of the charter, who we met with very early on to try and gain an understanding about what our work would entail, was that these, in particular, the classification and the compensation systems, were two of the systems that were so decentralized and provided such a foundation for corruption to occur. And I think it was a very deliberate and intent action to carve out those particular administrative responsibilities and assign them to the PRC, which is an independent body and is not subject to and elected officials' determinations. And there was a very clear rationale to support that decision. So I think I just wanted to take an opportunity to express the PRC's position about the question of ambiguity and where there may be some in the charter and where we don't believe there really is any. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Miss, there you go. Is your last name Gallagher?
No, boy, don't I wish.
And I didn't catch your name at the beginning.
Fox.
You're
Yes.
Fox. The other gentleman is always here. Where should we put the definition of our labor market? You spoke about that we don't have a clear, definitive definition for labor market.
It ought to be in that document that I call a compensation philosophy strategy kind of thing. That's where it needs to be defined.
Okay. Should it be mentioned on the website, on the county's website?
Oh, yeah.
In the
Yeah.
HR manual?
Yeah, I mean,
different things?
Sure.
Okay.
Communication and clarity is absolutely essential.
And in the conclusion section on page 60 of the larger report, it states that position class specifications are inconsistent in the information they contain, lack critical data, and the classification structure is unnecessarily complex. Can you explain this in a little bit more detail?
Yes. Well, there's two different classification description formats, and they're not consistent. One of them contains the Fair Labor Standards Act criteria, which is usually one of those essential items on a job description. The other one does. So that's a major issue. There are other inconsistencies that are listed in the report. I don't necessarily need to go into those, but as I recall, some of them don't include the minimum qualifications, others do. So that's a major issue. So that's the lack of that's the inconsistency and lack of critical data. The classification structure being unnecessarily complex is the concept, again, that I mentioned about we've got specialist job title in several different grades across the job. And while they don't necessarily have to be exactly the same, when you use a title, it ought to mean the same thing. So when I say this person is a manager, we all ought to have an understanding that that person actually manages people. This is just an example. That a department director or a director, that has a title, that has a meaning, that has a place that everyone understands. And that doesn't exist now. So that leads to inconsistency, it leads to some confusion among employees, and it's something that can be clarified, but it is not.
Yes, go.
With regards to the statement you just made as far as director, so we have people in positions that may have a title of a director that should essentially oversee a group of people, and maybe they're just a director in title. Is that kind of what you're saying? Some of the titles just don't coincide with their duties?
Kind of what I'm saying, yes.
The salary data that was provided by the county revealed that longevity or years of service had little, if any, influence on employee placement on pay schedules or step assignments. Per your experience, is this a common practice among employers?
No.
Okay. So that's just a major issue here.
It's a sore thumb. Yeah.
Any other questions for the consultant? Councilwoman Brown?
It really just is, you touched on specialists. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? With regards to specialists, can you give us some specifics with people who might have a specialist title and how the direction we should go when using a title?
I can't recall specific job descriptions that we read that said this one is, this one doesn't appear to be, that sort of thing. But I can tell you that there is kind of There are job titling standards in our industry. Quite frankly, there are few people that understand those. And so they'll slap a title onto a job because they say, well, it's, it's a specialist, it's a technician, it's an assistant. And yet they don't look across the organization and say, is it consistent from one job family to another? And that's what leads to confusion. So I've been in organizations, I'm quite sure that if we read all of the job descriptions here, we would find that there's a manager title that's used for somebody who doesn't manage anybody. They manage a program. That's not a manager, according to standard job titling convention. A director, as you said, should direct a department or a function or a unit of other people. And I would bet that there are some director titles that don't direct anything. Any people, excuse me. So there's a kind of a hierarchy and a standardization, and that's not consistent in the county. And so what we're suggesting is that you ought to bring some consistency. Now, let me make one other point, and that is there's a difference between working titles and the classification titles. In other words, this infrastructure titles. So we have many organizations that you want to have a working title because it may mean something a little bit more specific, and that's fine. You can have working titles, but when it gets back to the classification system and the pay grade and all of that sort of thing, that's when it changes. That's when the standardization has to exist. And that standardization not only protects you or helps you in terms of understanding and transparency, but it also protects you from unwarranted claims of all of those things that you don't want. Exactly.
Do you find that many, on that point, organizations have working titles and then classification system titles? Because that, to me, would seem a little confusing. If you,
It can be, but you
on a
might
temporary
have,
basis, sometimes you might assign an employee and say, you're the supervisor for the day. So
Yeah, right.
in that instance, I can understand that, but
well, usually the working titles is more functionally specific, and the more standardized title is more generic. So you could have specialist, but then the working title would have more words to it, which would be specific to their function or duty. And most, quite frankly, when classification systems are developed, the people that are developing don't understand the difference. And so they'll create a classification structure of working titles. And that's where you are now. You've got a classification structure of working titles.
in your analysis, and I just want to make sure, when your company did the analysis, did you consider the recent major change in the government's structure of us consolidating the recorder and all of those entities, and now we have these? Was that a consideration made?
Well, let me put it this way: it was a backdrop.
Okay.
So when we look at the correlation between years of experience and rate of pay within it, and the fact that that correlation is so low, when you look at where there are, so for example, there are some functions where the employees are consistently paid higher in the range in relationship to the years of experience in the job in the county. And those happen to be representative, and this is just an overall, it's not a real clean analysis. They kind of represent what the government was organized as. So there were some departments, functions that were a little more loosely applying the rules. And so that's what ends up to our findings, or some of our findings.
But many of those new employees that were merged into our system, they didn't come with a class plan structure. So could that have contributed to some of these issues that we
I
have?
suppose, yes, there would be some issues of pay that they sort of folded into the new system, and therefore we have some of these anomalies, yes.
Does the Gallagher analysis make any downward recommendations to salaries to address the equity or the compression issues?
No, I think I addressed that earlier.
And I
yeah.
thought I heard it
Yeah.
from, what was it, Gallagher? I mean, Jermaine.
Well, I do have to make a little story here. There was one organization where they did lower the pay of the employee. Mm-hmm. And this is always interesting because it was the HR director was overpaid, and so they lowered the pay of the HR director. This happened to be on a Native American reservation in Fort Yates, North Dakota, and the person walked across the street and got a position at a higher rate of pay with the Bureau of Indian Affairs doing exactly the same thing. But that's the only client I've ever had that they've reduced pay.
All right, any further questions for the consultant? Ms. Kapinski, the law department, Morales. We have one of our PRC commissioners here, Mr. Kaluka. Any questions for him? Well, I think we're good. Thank you very much for coming out. And
Thank
this was
you.
long awaited, and so now the administration as well as us are going to have to get together and implement something.
Do the right thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any miscellaneous business? Any other topics anyone want to bring up in regards to this? I just want to kind of address with the committee before we go to in the public comment section is I just kind of looked at steps in this whole process. One, to determine if there is a problem in this instance. We've determined that there's a problem. We've had the information put before us. Next step, to determine a plan to address the concerns given in this report. Address all or some. That's what we're facing. Number 3, identifying a cost for this problem or this issue. And that will come after number 2, if as an administration we're deciding if we're going to address all or some of these issues. Number 4, planning and implementation strategy to achieve pay equity based on merit and fitness for non-bargaining classified employees. And number 5, being very creative on how to achieve funding to stay competitive with the market and stay with cost of business, of living increases. There's very creative ways of how, we hear it in this committee when we talk about healthcare. They have a system already designed to cover that inflation cost every year. We hear that. So if we can do it in our health benefits, we can definitely do it with our employees' raises. So that was just kind of my analysis of looking over all this and where we should all go. Any comments to that or suggestions or your own thoughts?
You know, the thing about the health benefits, Madam Chair, is it's a common denominator. It doesn't matter if you're way up there or if you got the same plan. So that's kind of a equalizer, and it's good because if you had different levels of benefit, then you really would have inequality. And so I think we do a great job with health benefits. It's one of the things that this county has done right. Good direction, great direction. So, but pay, I could understand Mr. Fox saying the decrease. I know people get into the habit that whatever your budget plan is, they got generally every dollar is decided to where it's going to go and how they're going to pay the bill, and if there's any bump in the road, all of a sudden it's a catastrophe, and then you're trying to balance. You know, this is when you stop eating to pay for this bill or that bill, and so this is a complex problem, and.
But Councilman, my whole point is if we've done it, when we come to that 2-year budget, we make a determination that we know we're gonna have this many contracts with bargaining units and we have to maintain. So if we can do that for them, I'm sure that we can put that same thought process. You want to pay your workers. You don't want them to, now I know we have other issues, compression issues and a whole bunch of classification things, but in my number 2 step is we need a clear definition. I don't think we're gonna fix everything. We don't have the money for everything. But if we can work with the administration to say, out of these recommendations, what are they, that's the first step, what are they willing to live with? We put that plan out to the employees. This is what we're gonna work on. This is what we're gonna do. We're not gonna lock ourselves, like Mr. Fox said, and say we're not gonna tweak here and there. These are what we're gonna work on now. Maybe we'll address some in the future. I think that will work well with the PRC. It gives them a direction of where they should go. It gives the employees to say, okay, we don't know what those are, if there'll be compression issue or classification, but they'll know that we're moving in the right direction. And this is a long-term project, but we also need to, that helps us entail with the budget, the Councilman Greenspan's section, if we can get a clear understanding of which direction the administration wants to take before we get to that 5-month series, then we can lay out an actual plan. If we're not gonna give any, address any cost analysis in this year's budget, then we need to, that opens up to say, are we gonna give a 1% increase or something like that? So that was kind of my focus. Councilman Miller.
On that point, it's been our practice for many years now not to budget for any non-bargaining increases. And when the structure was amended twice, it was not done through the budget process. It was done later, kind of at an ad hoc basis. And we're going to have to give some thought to how we deal with this in the budget process, because as you say, it's agreed that we should move toward a system where the non-bargaining increases are comparable to the bargaining increases on a going forward basis. But suppose that we budget for 2% on non-bargaining. Well, this could affect our bargaining with the bargaining units, because they could easily say, well, you're pretty much stipulating that you're going to give 2%, so we're going to ask for 4% and we'll negotiate from there. And so the question is how do we implement this, which we need to, and how do we budget and plan for it, which we need to, but how do we do that without adversely affecting our bargaining position? And I think it's a tricky situation. So that's my comment.
On a humorous side, you go in when you negotiate with the bargaining employees and say, would you like to switch salaries? Would you like to switch roles? That's just on the humorous side. And I think if you use that, they would even agree that if they were on the other side, they'd want some kind of satisfaction or equity in pay. That's what they fight for every day. So, I've been reading some of those negotiation books with bargaining units, and I think they're reasonable, and that they would listen if it was presented to them correctly. Did you have a comment, Councilman Jabana?
I just want to say that I've been pleasantly surprised at the quality of bargaining and the reasonableness that we've had. I mean, it's just amazing that with all these different bargaining units, everybody's agreeing on healthcare and the level of increases. It's kind of like we've got this plan and everybody's cooperating, and I really appreciate that. And I think it's kind of amazing, because in my previous life in the city, no one was ever happy. No one. So I appreciate all the negotiating team and the reasonableness of our bargaining units.
In moving forward, do you think we should have further hearings on this to keep the administration, I'm kind of pushing this.
I think we got to do it piece by piece, and we can't wait to do it at the end. We got to
So that
find
means
steps. Yeah.
some more hearings, we can break it up.
Well, as we have some accomplishments, let's.
What do you think, Councilwoman? Okay. All right. So thank you all for coming. We do have other public comment, and that would be Reverend Pinckney.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon. I come here, as you know, for good and bad reasons. To the council members through the chairwoman, Yvonne Conwell. I came here today because when I had announced at that last meeting, when Councilman Germana had stated that someone should have been helping be my down, people didn't take him seriously. I'm being abused, neglected, and endangered by people that you're allocating your funding to. And I don't like it. I had to, even this morning, call the police because some people think just because I'm an activist for females to get us some liberties and respect, that I just accept anything. And some people think because I'm a preacher that I accept anything, and I don't. I had to call the police. Someone threw water on me while I was in my bed last night because they said that I talk too much in my own space. What's bothering me, Councilwoman, I got this in the mail yesterday from Anila K. Bird, the clerk of courts. It's strange because my mailbox has been being broken into for over 7 years. I've been living in the apartment for 8 years. The only mail I ever get is bad, negative mail or someone else's mail, or people cancel my mail. And I get mails from the clerk of court's office for cases that have never been heard. I've been beat up by law enforcement officers. As I told you before, they even gave me a suicide blanket and told me to kill myself. I have in my bag a police report from where I was actually kidnapped, held hostage in my home. My children and I have been raped, sodomized, and tortured by a preacher, where I was held in a Christian bookstore against my will and my rights, forced to perform sexual acts, and I won't get into all the gory details. The Department of Children and Family Services wrote lies down about me, spread rumors about me across the country, as well as other entities. Eden Incorporation has passed inspections for 8 years and it should not be being passed. The Health Department, the Building and Housing Department in the City of Cleveland are passing inspections that should not be being passed. I have rape reports. I have more police reports than probably have cases in the Library of Congress. I can't even help other people, including you all, because I'm not receiving the proper help I should be receiving. I realize that you all have a bell and a clock, but the clock has run out. I've fallen through the cracks of this system. It's not fair and it's not right. Please address this. I'm physically damaged behind this. My lungs are destroyed. I wear glasses because of head injuries. I wear glasses because people locked me up in facilities and forced drugs into my body that damaged me. And I don't come here to embarrass anyone, but I don't want to be embarrassed or shamed either. I've lost everything. Something needs to be done about this. This is horrible. This is my hometown and my homeland, and it's not fair that I'm not safe here. I have no respect or love from my family behind this because they see me as an embarrassment. I need something done about this, please. I'll give you this because I don't even like going in the Justice Center a lot of times because they harass me, they bully me, they throw me in the jail, they do horrible things to me. And I can't, none of the prosecutors are doing anything, Councilwoman Conwell. None of them. From Bill Mason to Prosecutor McGinty to Victor Perez to anybody. And they know about it. The police have altered my police reports. They have on my report when I was held hostage in my home that my children were actually with me. And then they say on the report, they purposely put the wrong address when there's a 911 call. And they know it's wrong. There's racial factors, there's gender factors, there's monetary factors. But please look into this. I'm not safe. I'm not even safe as on my buses. I have to call the police about the buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.